Hey everybody, Hunter back again from Showtime Studios. I've got the camera in a different position here, looking straight down on my workbench so that I can do a quick little tutorial here. And this is actually going out to Michael Forsyth. He had a question on actually cutting a panel and making it shorter, and also reducing the length of it, all at the same time. And he wanted to know what the best bond would be on doing something like that. So what I'm going to do is kind of simplify that process, because there's a lot of variables in it. And so I'm going to try to do the tutorial as simple as I can. Now the one thing you have to remember is I'm going to be using a piece of flat plastic here, 40 thousandths plastic. But I think he was talking about like maybe making a door on a car shorter. One thing you have to remember about that is most doors are going to be a compound curve, or very close to a compound curve. So you're going to actually, looking down on the panel, you're going to have a curve going this way. And then if you were to look at the panel standing up on end, you're going to have a curve going this way all at the same time. Now, as long as you can get all your compound curves lined back up after you've shortened it and reduced the height of it, or whichever way you're doing it, you can still use this technique. But I'm going to show you basically on this flat piece how to cut this, and the procedure that I use to put two panels back together. And then I won't cut the second half of it, but I'll do the explanation on how I go about that part, and maybe some of the steps on prepping for the finished part of it. So what we're going to do is we're going to pretend like this is a door out of a car. And I'm only going to make one cut in this piece of plastic. I'm not going to actually measure out, like say if you wanted to reduce the this height here by 1/2 of an inch, you would measure and take out, you'd make two cuts, one on your lower mark, and then a 1/2 inch above that you would make another one. So all I'm going to do is just basically cut this, make one cut in it, and it'll be the same difference as when you made the 1/2 inch cut and took that piece out and threw it away. It'll be those two panels coming back together. So that's what we're going to create here. So I'm just going to score that and snap it. Now that's what we have right now. Depending on how you're going to cut through your door, if you're going to do it with a hobby knife and then using the back side of the blade, remember that you're going to have a raised edge right on where your cut is on both panels. So what you want to do on that is go in with a sanding stick after you've made that cut before you do anything else, and you want to flatten that out. There'll be a burr that sticks up around your cut. Go ahead and get that flattened down, and what that'll do is make sure that when you put your two panels back together, they're true, and you don't get the two panels offset because of the maybe one side may be raised up more than the other. And if you go to glue those two panels together and you get them stepped, you're going to have to do a lot more body work. So make sure you get that sanded out. And the same thing on the upper panel. Just want to sand that down, and you don't have to do a lot. It's just taking that little burr that's on the edge off. And this is the same thing if you're scratch building or whatever and you make a cut through plastic with a hobby knife. You always want to sand the edge of the piece that you cut to make sure that it's nice and flat. Now when we set those two pieces together, there won't be any lip at all on this division line here. So the next part of it, this would be our door, and we've taken that 1/2 inch out, and we're going to put these two pieces back together now. Now what I like to do is take and flip this upside down. This would be the inside of your door. And in this case, I'm just going to use some scrap I got laying here. This is actually 10 thousandths plastic. If you don't have anything that needs to glue directly to the back side of this panel, you can go thicker. You could go in with a piece of 30 thousandths, 40 thousandths, something like that. It makes a much stronger bond. But you can do it with 10 thousandths. So what I do first is I'm going to use the Model Master liquid cement. And this is part number 8872. There is two different bottles that are black. One of them is not as good as the 8872. So definitely check when you're picking these up at your hobby shop or whatever. Make sure it's 8872. and I use a lot of this stuff. I swear by it. It's a very good adhesive, and it has its purposes. Now, on this particular thing that we're doing here in the tutorial, I'll be using 3 different glues. The next one I'm going to be using will be the Tamiya Extra Thin, and I'll also be using the Ambroid Pro Weld. Now, in place of that, you could use the Tenax 7R or any methyl ethyl ketone glue, any one that's based as an MEK you can use for this. But the first thing we're going to do is we have our panel flipped over, upside down. This is the inside of it. We're going to take the black glue and we're going to run just a very small bead near our division point where we're going to be putting that seam back together. And you will notice that I'm not putting any glue on this edge where the 2 pieces go together. That's what we're going to use the Ambroid Pro Weld for. Now, next thing you want to do is take your piece of strip that you cut, and this is actually about a 1/4 inch wide, and you just want to kind of center it over top of the division so that you have half on one panel, and then you'll have the other half sticking out in the mid-air right now. And what that's going to do is create a flange to set the next panel into place. Which actually I'll flip it over here the right way. There we go, that's flipped over the right way. And you can check your fit at that point right there and see if all this is smooth and lined up pretty good. And if it is, you're good to go. So the next thing we want to do is set that back down. And it's right side up now. So the side that we just glued is facing down. And same thing here, you want to take and run another bead of glue very lightly. And all we're doing with this is just something to tack this piece into place. We're not trying to get a lot of strength out of it right now. And you'll take your second panel that you want to glue to that. You'll put it into place. And if you've got any glue squeezing up out of the seam here, you put way too much glue on. You don't really, at this point in time, want any glue coming up out of the seam. Not from putting this backer panel on there. And what we have on the back is basically that right there. And that spreads the load of the 2 panels, gives you a nice glue bond on the inside. And as you can see on the outside, we are flat. And everything looks good. There it is at an angle. You can see how flat those 2 panels are. Now, next thing you want to do is flip that back over so that the strip is exposed on the inside. And at that point, I will go in with the Tamiya Extra Thin. And you could also do this with the Tester's liquid glue if you have it. I prefer the Tamiya Extra Thin. And what I do next is I'll come in right along the sides of this backer piece that we put in, and I will run a full bead of this glue around it. Now the good thing about this glue is any gaps that it finds, it will draw into and make a real good bond. So like I say, you just want to run that all the way around. You want to make sure that you get it all the way around the panel. And as you can see, I got this a little short here on the ends. You don't want to run this backer piece all the way to the edge, because then if you can see the edge of the panel, you're going to be able to see the backer piece also, so you don't want to do that. So what I do in that case is when I get here where the division line is, I go ahead and put the Tamiya Extra Thin right over top of that division line. And what's happening is that glue is actually drawing down in between those 2 panels. So at that point there, we have them glued together. And we have a nice strong bond. We don't have any glue squeezing out the top of this. The next thing that I will do is take the Ambroid Pro Weld or any MEK based liquid adhesive. And I just come in right on that line and just run a nice bead of the Pro Weld right down the line. Now what this does is this will actually draw all the way through this panel, the thickness of this panel, and it will actually go in and bond to that backer strip that we just put in. This stuff gets into any tiny little crevice that you can think of, and that's why this glue is so handy for doing this. And liquid glues tend to squeeze out and make just a ridiculous mess, and I don't like using them to actually glue up this panel right here, so that's why I use the MEK style. So now what we have is, this would actually be your door glued back together, and as far as the height of the door, you would have it reduced. Now, after that dries up, I would give it at least a couple hours to dry up, because you don't want to be messing with this glue joint here. And you will also notice that when you put MEK based adhesives in here, it will actually open up the seam a little bit, and that's good. You want that for when you do your light fill work. But the next thing after this dries that you want to do, now if you want to make this shorter from front to back, same procedure. Don't worry about, what you've already got there. That should be strong enough. You shouldn't have any issues with it. So what you would do is come back in and figure out how much you want to take out of that from end to end. Make your cut. And what we'll do is I'll go ahead and make the cut here. And like I say, you want to let this dry first. You don't want to be cutting into this before all this dries up. So definitely remember that. I'm just doing it quick because to keep the video as short as we can. But definitely let everything dry up real good on your first cut before you go to your second one. And now I'm just going to go in and make a relief cut on the back of our panel right here. And we'll go ahead and cut that the rest of the way through. And we'll snap that. Now, same thing that we did before. We've made that cut, so you want to come in and make sure that you clean up the edge of your panel. And I'm not going to do this whole thing. I'm just going to explain it's basically the exact same thing that we just done on the first part. You just want to clean up both sides. And actually, we're only at about 12 minutes on the video, so anybody that's interested in what I'm doing here, I'll go ahead and glue this together since I do have another piece cut. So what we have now is our two pieces. You've taken out the amount that you wanted to shorten the, say, the door, and we're going to put those back together. So we're going to take the panel, we're going to flip it over on one side, and I've got another piece already cut down. Same procedure. Just want to come in and mark that. And we're going to cut that to length. Come in with the black glue just like we did before. Put a little bit down the side. Now I keep that back about 1/16 of an inch away from the edge of that panel. That way this glue doesn't squeeze out when you set this into place. And like I say, the only reason for me putting that glue down at this point is so it holds this piece into place, so I can put the Tamiya extra thin on afterwards. So next we're going to cut the piece for the bottom. Same procedure. Nothing's real hard about this. I mean, there's a lot of variables that you have to look at before you start trying to do this type of work. But as far as the procedure of putting the panels together, it's not that difficult. Usually the most difficult part is going to be making everything else fit around these panels. Okay, so we have the two little fingers on there. And you want to flip it back over, right side up. A little bit of glue on both panels. Set your second half of the door back into place. Press it down. Flip that over. Come back in with your Tamiya extra thin and do the same thing. Make sure you run a bead all the way around that panel. And I stopped it short again, just like we did on the first one. So just go ahead and let the Tamiya extra thin cement flow down into the actual seam. And go ahead and go all the way around the lower panel here. Now at this point, what you want to do is where the edges of the top and the bottom piece meet this center piece, go ahead and get a nice coat of your Tamiya extra thin across that line. And what that will do is it will help bond all four of these pieces together and make a very strong backer for that. And now that we have it at that point, just flip it over. And we're going to come in with our Ambroid Pro Weld. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to run a bead of it right down the seam. Just like that. And you will set it to the side and let that dry. And once you do that, you'll be ready for doing the finished body work on it and making that seam disappear. I would say give it at least a couple of hours, if not overnight, when you have something that's been cut up like this. But once this dries, this will be back to being pretty much a solid piece of plastic again, and all you have to do is sand it and go in and very carefully fill your seams. Now, another thing that I'll show you here real quick that I like to do with the putty when I'm doing seams like this is, let me get my Tamiya tape here. Here we go. I actually have a video from before on doing this, but what I like to do when I'm filling this style seam is to actually take a little bit of Tamiya tape and come back away from the seam about, anywhere from a 1/16 to an 1/8 of an inch. And I'll hold it up here closer to the camera so you can see exactly what I've done. You can actually see the, if I can find the camera, there we go. You can see the seam down through the center and the Tamiya tape. Now the next thing that you would do, and that's after all this is dry. Remember, none of this is dry right now. I'm just doing this for the video, but make sure all this is dry before you do this part. And then I just take a little bit of the Tamiya putty, and I come in and basically I want to fill up to the height of the top of this tape with the putty. And make sure you press that down into your seam and get that filled in real good. And there we have that part. And this would be the same thing once you have this part done. You want to come in and just peel the tape away. And what that does is take all the excess putty out of the way, and it doesn't give you a whole bunch to have to clean up. So now what we have is one very nice clean putty line that you can see. And once this would dry, you want to turn it around, do the Tamiya tape down the side of this seam. Same procedure. Once your putty's dried overnight on the top and the bottom seam, once that's all dried up, you want to come in with your sanding stick and go ahead and sand that out, and you should be pretty good to go. Like I say, there is a lot of variables depending on what would have to be glued to the inside of this. This little cross in here could get, in the way of a panel. So a lot of times you have to relief cut some of your, whatever glues to this, you have to relief cut it to make up the difference, to make it go in place right. But that's the best way that I can think of to, glue panels back together. This kind of gives you a backer, it gives you the strength back in it. And it actually makes your glue joint, thicker because you're adding this thickness of plastic on the back of it. And that gives you a quick procedure on how I do the putty on a seam like that. So if you have any questions or concerns, just leave me a comment on the video. And hopefully, Michael, this will help you out and, point you in the right direction. And if you have any questions, just shoot me an email or something, and I'll help you out, any way I can. So that's all I've got for today. Like usual, I thank you for watching, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.